Imagine pouring your heart into a dream, only to have your own parents crush it, then watch them hand everything you ever wanted to your cousin. That's exactly what happened to me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lena, and ever since I was a kid, I believed in building things that mattered. I wasn't chasing luxury cars or fancy titles. I wanted to solve problems that touched real people's lives. My idea wasn't flashy or glamorous. It was simple but powerful. A line of eco-friendly household products, made affordable so families could reduce waste without breaking the bank. I poured months into sketching designs, researching suppliers, testing prototypes in my tiny apartment kitchen. It was the kind of idea that didn't just aim for profit, but for impact. I remember sitting my parents down one evening, nervously clutching my folder of notes and samples. My heart was racing, but I was excited. I thought they'd see the spark in me, the same way they'd always bragged about when I was a kid. Instead, I got silence. My dad looked at me, then at the papers spread across the table and sighed. "It's too risky," he said flatly. My mom didn't even glance up from her phone when she added, "You should find something stable, Lena. A job that won't leave you broke." The sting of those words cut deeper than I ever admitted to them. It wasn't just rejection. It felt like they were rejecting me. I wasn't asking for millions, just belief. A little support. A chance. But instead of encouragement, I got dismissal. They made it sound like chasing my dream was foolish, like I was a child scribbling in a coloring book instead of an adult with a vision. That night, I packed away my prototypes, tears slipping down my face. I told myself I'd get over it, but somewhere deep inside, I knew this wound was going to shape everything that came next. When the sting of rejection was still fresh, I found out something that nearly broke me. One weekend at a family gathering, my parents couldn't stop smiling as they announced that they were investing in my cousin Drew's new project. He had come up with an app that sounded impressive on the surface, but if you listened closely, it was little more than buzzwords strung together. The idea lacked structure, the plan was paper thin, and yet my parents spoke about it as if he'd just reinvented the wheel. I sat there, my hands tight in my lap, trying not to let my face betray what I felt. Just weeks earlier, I had laid out a carefully researched proposal, showing them real prototypes and market studies. That was too risky. But now Drew, with nothing more than a slideshow and a grin, was celebrated like a visionary. The laughter, the pride in their voices, the way they clapped him on the back as though he'd already succeeded, it was unbearable. Later that evening, I overheard the words that cut me the deepest. My father said to another relative, "Drew just feels more reliable. He has the right kind of drive." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "We know he'll follow through." The same people who dismissed me without hesitation were praising him for qualities I had demonstrated my whole life. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was as if I had become invisible. I wasn't the daughter with ideas worth hearing. I was the afterthought, the background character in a story where someone else got the spotlight. I excused myself, locked myself in the bathroom, and let the tears come silently. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes, it comes from the people you thought would stand with you no matter what. And sitting there on the cold tile floor, I realized the people I had wanted most to believe in me had chosen someone else. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm I couldn't escape. My parents' choice lingered in every silence, in every look they gave me that said more than words ever could. But instead of asking them to reconsider, instead of lowering myself to plead for another chance, I made a quiet promise. I would move forward alone. I picked up every shift I could find. Mornings at the cafe, evenings stacking shelves, weekends tutoring kids who barely wanted to be there. The hours blurred together, but I kept my head down, collecting paycheck after paycheck. Each dollar was carefully folded away, not for clothes or distractions, but for the future I was building piece by piece. My body ached from exhaustion, yet the thought of proving them wrong carried me through the long nights. In the little time I had left, I sketched and refined, sourcing scraps of material from clearance bins and secondhand shops. My apartment became a workshop, cluttered with tools, jars, and endless notes. I worked in silence, never breathing a word to my family. It was my secret rebellion, my hidden vow that the dream they dismissed would not die just because they chose not to see it. The betrayal that had once made me crumble now sharpened into focus. Every sacrifice, every hour of lost sleep, Every rejection I faced outside my family circle only fueled the determination burning inside me. I no longer needed their approval. I needed results. Quietly, steadily, I was forging something real. Revenge wasn't about shouting or demanding acknowledgement. It was about resilience, about standing tall when they expected me to give up. And in that solitude, under the weight of exhaustion and secrecy, I found strength I never knew I had. My silence wasn't defeat, it was preparation. It didn't take long before Drew's project became the shining jewel of every conversation. At dinners, birthdays, even casual phone calls, his name was spoken like it carried magic. My parents lit up whenever they described his vision, their voices brimming with pride as if they had discovered the next great pioneer. To them, every tiny update was a triumph, every minor step forward proof that their gamble had been right. At family gatherings, the praise spread like wildfire. Aunts and uncles leaned in eagerly, asking Drew about launch dates and growth potential. He would grin, spinning stories about partnerships that barely existed and expansion plans that sounded grand but vague. Nobody questioned him. Instead, they applauded his confidence. Plates clattered, glasses clinked, and in the middle of it all, he was hailed as the man who would soon turn everything he touched into gold. I sat at the same tables, but it was as though I wasn't there. When conversations turned toward me, it wasn't curiosity I met, it was ridicule wrapped in laughter. "Still chasing your little ideas, Lena?" someone would tease, smirking over their drink. Others chimed in with half-jokes about me being the dreamer, who couldn't find her footing. I forced myself to smile, though inside, every word felt like a cut that wouldn't stop bleeding. My parents never corrected them. Instead, they leaned further into the narrative, boasting about Drew's potential fortune and dismissing my path as a phase. To them, he was the golden child destined for millions, while I was little more than a cautionary tale. Every cheer for him, every laugh at my expense, sank deeper than I let anyone see. I learned to swallow the bitterness, keeping my head lowered, my silence steady. Because while they celebrated him as the future, I carried a quiet truth inside me. Their mockery wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. Beneath the polished image everyone admired, Drew's venture was quietly unraveling. The moment real money flowed in, he treated it less like capital and more like a ticket to indulgence. Expensive offices, unnecessary gadgets, company cards maxed out on luxury instead of essentials. He bled resources faster than he could replace them. What looked shiny on the surface was rotting underneath. When experienced mentors tried offering guidance, he brushed them off with a cocky grin. To him, every warning was just noise. Instead of building a strong team, he surrounded himself with friends who treated the business like a playground. Meetings turned into hangouts, deadlines slipped, and tasks that required skill were handed to people who had none. What should have been growth became chaos. Still, my parents clung to the illusion. Whenever rumors of trouble surfaced, they defended him fiercely. "It's just part of the process," my father would insist. My mother waved off any doubts, repeating that every great entrepreneur stumbles before success. Their pride refused to crack, even as evidence piled higher that Drew was in over his head. I stayed silent, never feeding the gossip. While others whispered about his reckless spending, I kept my focus on my own late nights and long shifts. I had no energy to waste on gloating or pointing fingers. Watching from the sidelines, I understood that his downfall would speak louder than anything I could say. And so I worked quietly and steadily, while his empire of glass began to shake. The contrast was stark, his chaos against my persistence, his arrogance against my discipline. I didn't need to expose him. Time was already doing that for me. The string of refusals had nearly worn me down. Meetings ended with polite smiles, follow-up emails disappeared into silence, and doors closed before they ever truly opened. Still, I kept showing up, refining my pitch, tightening the numbers, carrying samples like they were pieces of my soul. And then, when I was beginning to wonder if anyone would ever look past my age or lack of connections, one person finally leaned in. He wasn't a billionaire or a celebrity backer, just a practical investor with a sharp eye for potential. Instead of brushing me aside, he asked real questions, the kind that showed he was actually listening. For the first time, someone outside myself believed there was something worth building. The agreement we signed wasn't massive, far from it, but it gave me enough breathing room to move forward. With his modest funding, I could finally produce more than a handful of test pieces. Orders began in a trickle. A few families tried my products, then neighbors, then local shops willing to stock a small batch. The feedback was genuine, and slowly, sales grew beyond what I could handle alone. It wasn't explosive, but it was steady, the kind of momentum that told me I was on the right path. Nights once spent worrying about bills were now filled with packing boxes and responding to customers who cared about what I was making. And as word spread, so did whispers in circles I'd only dreamed of reaching. Sustainability groups began mentioning my name, blogs highlighted my story, and buyers started calling me instead of the other way around. I didn't announce it to my family, didn't post dramatic updates online. I just worked, letting the results speak for themselves. In quiet corners of the community, recognition was beginning to grow, and with it, a sense of vindication I held close to my chest. It started quietly, like cracks spreading through glass. First, there were delays in his product launch, then glitches that frustrated early users. The glowing praise that once surrounded Drew began to dull as complaints surfaced online. Customers who had trusted his promises felt cheated, and their disappointment turned into loud frustration. Refund requests piled up faster than his team could handle, and soon, the numbers no longer hid the truth. Debt was suffocating the company. Inside his office, the atmosphere shifted from laughter to tension. The friends he had hired, once eager to bask in his spotlight, began drifting away. Some quit outright, unwilling to carry the burden of his poor choices. Others stayed just long enough to collect a final paycheck before walking out, leaving him with empty desks and mounting obligations. For someone who had been hailed as unstoppable, the collapse was swift and brutal. My parents tried desperately to maintain the illusion. When questions arose at family dinners, they brushed them aside with weak smiles and vague answers. But their pride couldn't shield them from reality. Creditors called, partnerships dissolved, and the once celebrated venture crumbled into nothing more than unpaid bills and broken trust. The whispers started soon after. Relatives who had once paraded Drew as the star now lowered their voices, trading gossip about his downfall. "All that money gone," one muttered. Another shook their head, saying, "We thought he'd be the one." The same mouths that had praised him endlessly now used his name with pity or disdain. And there he was, stripped of the adoration that once lifted him high, left with nothing to show for all the noise. The empire built on arrogance and excess had finally caved in, and everyone could see it for what it was. While Drew's mess played out in the shadows, something different was happening on my side. A reporter from a small publication reached out after hearing about my products through a community event. At first, I thought it would be a short blurb tucked in the back pages, nothing anyone would notice. Instead, the article ran as a feature, describing my journey from scraping together savings to building something sustainable. That single story sparked more than I imagined. Within days, inquiries came pouring into my inbox. Local stores wanted to stock my line. Families were asking how to order directly, and organizations focused on green living began promoting my work. What had once been a slow climb suddenly turned into a wave of demand I struggled to keep up with. My tiny operation expanded rapidly, boxes stacked high against the walls, shipping labels covering my desk. Soon, bigger outlets took notice. Radio interviews, online write-ups, and community spotlights painted me as an entrepreneur who had defied the odds. The recognition felt surreal, not because I had chased fame, but because people finally saw value in the vision I had guarded so fiercely. My products weren't just being sold, they were being talked about as essentials, items that belonged in every household striving for change. And somewhere in the middle of this whirlwind, my parents looked at me differently. The disbelief in their eyes was almost as loud as their earlier dismissal. They had invested their pride in someone else, yet here I was, flourishing without them. At gatherings where they once boasted about Drew, they now stumbled over words when others praised me instead. For the first time, the tables had turned. The daughter they once brushed aside had become the name people admired, the one whose work carried weight and promise. And though I didn't seek their approval anymore, I couldn't ignore the quiet shock written across their faces as they realized the truth. The dream they rejected was now thriving without them. They came to me one evening, unannounced, carrying that strained mix of pride and discomfort that words can't quite cover. My mother's voice trembled as she said, "We always knew you had it in you." My father nodded quickly, adding, "We just wanted to see you strong and look at you now." Their smiles were practiced, but behind them was guilt they couldn't hide. I listened quietly, my hands resting on the table, heart beating hard against my ribs. Part of me had longed for these words years ago, but hearing them now felt different. They weren't born of faith in me. They were born of regret, of realizing too late that the person they had dismissed had proven them wrong. The weight of it pressed against my chest, and tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I held their gaze and answered with the steadiness I had earned. "You didn't believe in me," I said softly. "You told me to stop before I even began. You didn't just doubt my idea, you doubted me." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. I didn't raise my voice or demand apologies. I didn't need to. Everything I had built, every milestone I had reached without their help, was proof enough. My success stood taller than any defense they could offer. Revenge wasn't shouting or throwing blame. It was standing in that room, unshaken, knowing they could see what they had once refused to see. As I rose to leave, I felt no anger in my steps, only strength. For the first time, I wasn't the girl seeking approval. I was the woman who had carved her own path, carrying scars that had become armor. And in that moment, the balance shifted. I didn't need their validation. My triumph was the only answer they would ever need. Time softened the sharpest edges of the pain, but the scars remained. I chose to let go of the bitterness I carried toward my parents, though forgetting was impossible. Their doubt had carved deep into me, shaping the very fire that drove me forward. Forgiveness didn't mean erasing the past. It meant refusing to let it weigh me down any longer. Drew, on the other hand, faded into the background. Once the star of every conversation, he now avoided gatherings, his confidence replaced with a quiet shame. He no longer looked me in the eye, and I didn't chase him for it. His choices had spoken for themselves, and the distance between us became its own silent acknowledgement of what had unfolded. Meanwhile, my work grew beyond what I had once dared to imagine. New partnerships formed, larger opportunities arrived, and what began as sketches on a notepad evolved into something much bigger. A company with reach, purpose, and momentum. Piece by piece, I was building not just a business but an empire, one that stood on resilience rather than borrowed pride. Looking back, I understood the strange gift betrayal had given me. It forced me to dig deeper, to endure rejection, to hold on to my vision even when the closest people to me couldn't. The very wound that once left me feeling small became the reason I refused to give up. Every sleepless night, every doubt I had to silence, every obstacle I pushed through, all of it had led me here. And if there was one truth I carried with me, it was this. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is proving the people who doubted you completely wrong. Betrayal may have started my journey, but triumph became the ending. What mattered most wasn't their faith or their validation. It was the strength I found in myself to rise, to endure, and to win. Hey besties, thanks for staying with me till the end of this story. Imagine chasing your dream, getting crushed by your own parents, then watching them hand their support to someone else, only for their golden choice to collapse while you rise stronger than ever. Betrayal hurts, but it can fuel the fire to win. If this touched you, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.